got barbecue back there, and you didn't invite me. Hurt my feelings.
Welcome back to another episode of Trending Fantasy. I'm John Bauer. Find me on X at the Bauer Club. You know I'm joined by Mitch Sorensen at Dino MC. Mitch, I was thinking about some things over the last week, and one thing that really intrigues me, and a lot of conversations popping up again on Reddit, X, the DD Fantasy Football Discord community. You talk about future picks and you talk about certain types of assets. And it kind of got me thinking about like the time value of money or the time value of assets. So basically, how long do you wait to use that money? The sooner you use it, the more valuable it is. And there's so many different ways. Like we try to keep this to like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, maybe 5 hours tonight. We'll see. But there's so many different ways you can relate this to fantasy football and specifically dynasty fantasy football. With you specifically, and again, we play in a lot of leagues, but whereas I might look at it more from a portfolio approach, and I know several others on the DD fantasy football community look at it the same way, Mitch, you tend not to. So kind of more on the micro level for you, do you find that you tend to invest a little bit heavier into the future, a little bit more win now? What is your general approach like if you just had to look at it on a micro level?
What I've noticed over the last, 6 or 7 years, it depends on the buy-in, to be honest. If it's a $30, $35 buy-in, those leagues I'm more willing to play into the future to try to create that super team. But I'll be honest, once I get in the leagues to where it's like a $75, $100 buy-in or higher than that, I find myself trying to contend every single year in those leagues because the payouts, hey, $700, where in the $30 league, it's $150 sometimes. Sometimes it's $200. And it's like, well, I could long play that, but I do like winning. And so it's definitely league dependent, more so than like, hey, what do I feel like today sort of thing.
I get that. And there's certain things like you look at, we'll dig into different types of assets and what is their value today? What could they be in the future? And does it make sense to go that route? And certainly looking to invest heavily in the future kind of comes into play there. But you could look at it strictly from a prize pool perspective too. You kind of mentioned it. If you have a larger prize pool, let's say you have a $500 first place title, right? And you're going in and you're looking to win it this year. That prize pool is going to be $500 in 10 years as well. So do you put yourself in a situation to win that $500 today, or do you put yourself in a situation? Now, here's the thing. Ideally, you put yourself in a situation where you can win repeatedly, right?
That's the hope. That's always what we're building towards. Yep.
And that's whenever you start to look at the future and if you're investing in picks or assets that could gain value. So it's always interesting when you look at it from that perspective. And like, it's not strictly like a financial analysis. Well, in real estate and commercial real estate, we do it all the time where you look at the rent stream over the course of the lease and you have free rent, tenant improvement allowance, all that good stuff coming in right from the get-go. And ultimately it impacts the net present value, but those dollar amounts. With fantasy football, with dynasty fantasy football, you don't know those, dollar amounts or values when you look at these players. Now, the leagues that you are going a little bit more win now approach, you want that $500, you want it today. Do you find yourself aging out in any of those leagues and you're kind of forced to do a hard rebuild, or do you kind of have a little bit more success with a gradual retool as you go along?
I would say honestly, more often than not, it ends up being an age out. After 4 or 5 years, you end up having to rebuild at some point. But I think a big thing that I think some dynasty players mess up with is they go into a rebuild. They're like, well, hey, that means I need to sell every single asset that I have to get the 101. And then, it means you're going to get the 101 the following year as well. But it's going to take you 4 years to rebuild that. To where if you could just do a small 1 to 2 year rebuild and not trade away every single asset, you end up getting the 103 one year, the 105 the next year. Then all of a sudden you're competing. Like if you look at this year, if you get Travion Henderson at 105, I don't think it's that much different than Myron Hampton at 102. And so when you're doing that, I think as long as you age out gracefully, I think it works out pretty well, to be honest with you.
And especially if you find yourself winning a championship
Mm-hmm.
in that window, and we'll kind of get to the competitive window here in a minute. From an advice perspective, you're giving advice to our listeners
Mm-hmm.
here. Do you think there is more risk with aging out or more risk with people? They tend to hang on to those young assets hoping they're going to amount to anything.
Yeah, it's the two-way street with the veterans. We know how they're going to produce. Usually, right? Most of the time, we kind of know what A-Chain's going to do this year, and from there on. And you could do a lot of things with picks too, or you could go out and you could get those veteran pieces. But if you're the guy who wants to have the picks on your team, you're making those rookie picks, you better be right. Because if you don't have good veterans, and then let's just say that 101 ends up being Bryce Young or a Tua or whatever, just something that isn't immediately moving up your value or giving you positional advantage at all, then you're already behind the 8 ball because you didn't have a good roster to begin with. Your rookies that you're drafting on your team aren't helping you at all. And yeah, there's always the trade aspect that comes in. It doesn't mean just because someone's on your team, that means you have to use them. There is always the value aspect of it. But just in a nutshell, if you are doing that slow build, you have to hit on those players. You can't have 2 drafts in a row to where we like them as prospects. They end up not turning out. Then all of a sudden you have nothing. You don't have picks and you don't have players. And then what do you do?
You made the comment. I think it's perfect. And again, I go back to the commercial real estate aspect. Like, you have your cash flow, but you don't have the option to cash out throughout certain points, throughout your lease, throughout the life of the lease. Whereas here, you invest in that younger asset, there might very well be a market and you don't have to sit there and take that asset for its entire life, or the dynasty life, if you will. And that's such an important aspect, because there are people, they will tend to hang on to assets for far too long. You can call it hopium, you can call it whatever you want, and we all do it from time to time.
Oh, yeah,
Hey,
definitely.
it's going to be different this time. My guy is going to bounce back. My guy is going to recoup value. And I had a comment here. When you move on from a young asset, you really only take a loss whenever that happens, whenever you do move on. So if you sell before they bounce back, or if they ever do bounce back, that's where you're taking your loss, right? So if you hold on to them and they ultimately regain value, and the way dynasty fantasy football goes these days, Mitch, we're not very forgiving. If you don't produce right away, it's like people are cutting bait.
That's the thing. Like in the summer, we love to say, hey, these dynasty assets, like the wide receivers, they hold their value so well. No, they don't. The good ones do. The bad ones don't. And we see ebbs and flows with every single position. I mean, as soon as week 1 comes out, we saw, what was it, last year by week 3, Isaiah likely was like a top 5 tight end. And we see that stuff constantly. That's not an anomaly. That is something that's going to happen every single year, to where we have, hey, this old vet goes down, this young guy comes in because he has one good game, because that's just who we are as dynasty managers. This is what we do. But this is why dynasty is fun, because you don't get that in redraft. You don't get that in just underdog best ball mania stuff. This is kind of the only fantasy form to where, hey, you get that weekly action and you can make trades and you can immediately improve your team, to where if you have a bad draft and redraft, you're done the second that it happens. But in dynasty, you could go out and have a very bad draft, and 3 years later, all of a sudden improve your team and you're contending.
We talked about aging out and the risk of building your roster a little bit too old. Do you think there's ever a situation where there is risk building with too much youth?
Yeah, but at the same time, dynasty managers love youth, man. So if you're doing it and you're not active, then yeah, it's just a bad move to make. You should get some vets on your team. But if you're an active manager and just building around youth, you'll be completely fine, because more than likely, I had a trade offer today, 27 second for, who was it? It was Ray Davis and Jonathan Brooks. And I'm like, that is a smash every day of the week, because there's people who are like, hey, that's a second-year player. I'm going to take him. They want those players, to where I'm like, well, just give me that pick. Those players are toast at this point.
And we always talk about the increased flexibility and being able to move on from that pick in different ways that you wouldn't be able to necessarily do with Jonathan Brooks or Ray Davis in that case specifically. And you made a comment that I think is perfect for the risk of building around youth and too much youth. If you're in an inactive league, everybody says, hey, picks are going to gain value. You're going to be able to move on from them. Ultimately, we don't want to have to make every single rookie pick whenever we're on the clock, if it even gets to that point. But there's some leagues that you don't have a choice unless you're selling at a loss, unless you're trying to, just hound other dynasty managers in your league. It can be very challenging. So if you're in one of those inactive leagues, that's where I like to go a little bit more with a balanced approach, sprinkle some youth in there with those vets and mix those assets in along the way. Here was another interesting one. Do you ever make a move that makes sense value-wise, but it does not align with your team's competitive window? So let's say, and it seems like Saquon Barkley comes up all the time when it comes to trade scenarios. Obviously, he is an immediate contributor for you in the upcoming year. You're a contender. You move on from Saquon because let's just say somebody gives you like 3 first value.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to exaggerate a little bit. I think typically the 2 first value is where things get interesting. Let's say somebody gives you 3 first value. You don't know what your next move is. You don't have a contingency plan beyond this one move. So, hey, what's your plan beyond this? We don't know. Do you ever find yourself making moves like that, even though it kind of goes against what your team build is like?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a smart way to play, because I'll say it all the time. If there's a player in the NFL that you don't like, you don't have to roster them. That one player, unless it was like Lamar Jackson during his special years, Josh Allen recently, you can live without a player. So if you are getting better value by trading, let's say a Saquon, let's say you get 2.5 firsts, I might not be able to replace Saquon, but I bet you I can move one of those first and come pretty darn close to get an aging back trade for a Derrick Henry last year, right? So you give up a first, you're already 1.5 firsts ahead of that point, and you're not losing that much point per game wise. So I think that's something you definitely need to be open with.
Something came up in the Discord today. And again, that is why I love the Discord community, because we get ideas from conversations that are taking place, and we incorporate it on the weekly episodes of Dynasty Theory. We incorporate it on Trending Fantasy, and I know the other content creators among the DD community do the same exact thing. But there was a trade that was being discussed, and it was involving a 27 first, but it was like really, let's say we knew that was going to be the 101. This is where the time value of assets gets really interesting, because like, if you're getting Jeremiah Smith, like locked and loaded, but you have to sit on that for 2 years, how does that come into play? Like, how do you evaluate that? Because that's kind of like the net present value stuff, and you got to discount it back. Like, that's kind of the $1 million question when it comes to these things, and you're projecting, and you got to sit on an asset for multiple years.
So I think that one is so draft dependent, right? Because we knew the Saquon year when he was coming out. We knew what that 101 was, and we had that name chalked in where he was going in startups. You could pretty much do that with Smith already. Smith's going to come in. He's going to be a first round in a 12-team league startup pick. He's going to be valued as a top 12 guy in Dynasty. At worst, maybe top 15, but he's going to be there. So you might as well put that value on him now. And so I'm okay trading for that, because I don't think you have to pay quite that value yet. And if you don't have to pay that value, someone will in the future. But that is an asset I am completely okay, even if it means it takes me away from being, if I'm like a for sure contender, I could win the league, maybe I don't do it at that point. If I think I could finish the 108, 109 and 12-team league, then I'll make that move in almost every single league that I have right now.
gun to head,
Mhm.
who's the highest? You can pick any position.
Yeah.
Who's the highest ranked player that you would move today straight up for that locked and loaded 2027 101? So you're losing 2 years of production
Mhm.
from the asset you're moving. You got to sit on this pick. And again, we're making a very probably silly, we'll say, assumption that you're not going to move that pick, because we all know that you could flip that for possibly more. But let's say you have to sit on it.
Right. So if I am doing it, just wide receiver wise, can I move Lad McConkey or Drake London? Do you think that gets me there? They're both worth about 2 firsts, right? Because just a 26 first isn't going to get there. So then it makes you go up. Am I really going to give CD Lamb for him? No. Am I going to do Brian Thomas Jr.? Maybe. But I mean, that's like, well, what's the point?
Isn't that kind of the asking price, though, if
Yeah,
you would
I
think
mean,
about it?
that's the thing is if that's how it actually is, then I'm good just not taking them because you're not getting really any value decrease there. If you end up having to pay Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's already a late first startup pick anyway. So you're just losing value for the sake of losing values. This goes back to I saw a debate on X 1 or 2 days ago. Someone came out and said, "Hey, Gibbs is the biggest sell of the offseason. You should sell him." And I'm like, why? Like, even if you're right, let's just say he goes down just a little bit. Why sell him? What are you getting for him? Okay, you're getting, well, I don't like him, so I'm going to sell him for 2 firsts. What's the point? What's the point selling him for 2.5 firsts? I mean, I just don't understand the, hey, someone's doing really good. So, hey, we got to get off him at this point. Or they could just continue to be good. I mean, if they said the same thing about Bijan, I would be the exact same way. This isn't just a line, right? But that's why it stuck out to me. I'm like, what's the point? And so that kind of went to the value of assets that we're talking about today, to where I still have to have a reason to trade away these players. I know that hope in Smith is there, but if I'm trading away Puka Nacua to get him, I'm like, well, I'm just going to take the one who's really good in the NFL already, because there's every chance in the world we have another Marvin Harrison happen. And now everyone's like, well, I don't know if he's a top 20 wide receiver at this point. To me, that's crazy. I still value him there. There's a lot of people who don't.
And that's something, the whole discounting of assets, because we see it all the time with injured players, right?
Mm-hmm.
An injured player, they hit the trade block, somebody's looking to contend, you typically get them at a discount. But again, it's because you're not getting production this year now. Like if a player goes down for the season and you have to wait on them for 1 year, you get the discount because, well, it's that's the way it typically goes, right?
Yep. Yep.
And that asset is now a year older. But with the rookie picks, it's always interesting because let's say anything were to happen to Jeremiah Smith, you still have presumably a very strong 2027 class.
Yes. Yes.
And if you have that 101, now what gets interesting is when you think about how much risk there is in moves involving future draft picks, as today they're seen as random. Like if you get a trade question involving a 27 first, typically it's like, okay, like I know this manager, like this team is really, really bad. They don't have assets to put them in a better situation. So, okay, that's a unique situation. But overall, it's like, let's say mid to late for this 27 first. And it's not necessarily like the money comparison where I'm like, okay, Mitch, here's $100 today. And in 1 year, it's going to be worth $105, whatever.
Right.
But you knew you were given $100. Whereas the 27 first, it could be 101. It could be 112. So now it's like, okay, Mitch, here is some money. I'm not going to tell you how much it is. Yeah. Could be 50, could be 100. And that's kind of when you look at the range between 101 and 112. So you very well pay $1 today for something that ends up being 50 cents because it ends up being a playoff pick. You know, and I think that's something that managers are getting a little bit wiser to. Typically, it's like, okay, I'll buy this pick even 1 year out with the thought that it's going to be a playoff pick. You don't get too many. They're like, I'm paying that face value. But overall, do you think that risk is incorporated into trade discussions too much, too little, just right?
That's a tough question, man. Because I think it's just so league dependent in who's in your leagues. Because there's some leagues well, no, let me take that back. Because I think the vast majority of leagues, there's always someone who's going to buy draft picks. There's always someone who's willing to lose. To compare it to specific players, there's some people who won't go out and buy JSN for his price right now. And so it's getting off the assets to where they hit big for a year. Look at Bucky Irving. I'm not downplaying him at all, right? But if you came up to me and you're like, hey, I want to get out of Bucky Irving right now, I could get 2.5 firsts for him. They're completely random. I don't know if it's the 103 or it's the 112. I'm like, look, if you feel like it's a good time to get on Bucky, that's a good price to do it. But if someone's like, well, I want to get on, and someone's offering me I know it's the 105 in the 26 draft. I'm like, well, that's not enough. Like, you have to at least give me enough to get off these players.
Here's another interesting question because it came up specifically in a league chat that we made a trade. Mm-hmm. We co-manage, and we made it. And I thought it was a really interesting question, and it kind of got me thinking. We moved a 26 first and a 27 first in a trade. It's a 14-team super flex league, and the question came up in the chat because we weren't the only trade that happened at that time. It was a flurry of trades. Are people making these moves because they're worried that the league's going to be around in 2 to 3 years? And I can say, like, I've never made a move specifically for that reason. I don't know that it's ever really crossed my mind, but it is something to think about. And it's kind of a maybe frowned upon thought, but if the league, and I know there's gonna be some comments about this, I know, but if we're like, okay, it almost folded in previous years maybe, and we were able to find replacements, but now it's like, does it exist in 2 and 3 years? Are teams more willing to move those picks? Because again, you look at it from a time value perspective. If I can get production now and I can win the league this year, for a league that maybe doesn't exist in 2 to 3 years. And that you're going to get people saying, well, why are you playing in that league?
Yeah.
Right. And that's a sketchy situation, but it's something that I think needs to be in the back of people's minds. And I think it was a fair question. It was an interesting question, but I've never thought that way before.
Yeah. So there was a commissioner that both of us had a few leagues with. And I told you 2 years ago, this guy, he's going to burn every single league to the ground. Like, I told you it was going to happen. I mean, I had 2 of his leagues to where I had multiple first-round picks, and I was paid ahead. I was good to go. And, like, I knew it was going to happen, but I still played Dynasty the way that I should, the way that I think I should. But, look, let's just call it how it is. There's a lot of churn and burn Dynasty managers out there that are in the league for 3 years. If they see any reason of, like, hey, this commission might be out, I'm going to blow through every single pick. I have had DMs from people being like, hey, I think this league's going to die. Should I just trade all of my future picks and go all in now? I'm like, I personally won't, but there's a lot of people that would. And so if you are, hey, I'm going to do everything I can to win this league because I don't think it's going to last. I mean, you could go about it that way, but there's people who do that and then just leave the league anyways, whether it dies or not. We've seen that a lot in the last 3 years too, where, I mean, I had to fail probably 10 to 15 orphans this past season. Not one of them were good. There wasn't one that people were like, oh, I really, really want that orphan. Every single one of them, the team sucked because the managers weren't good. And it's how it is. And that's how so, that's a perfectly fair question to ask, because I do think, I would say probably over half of people probably are more willing to move their future picks in that scenario, especially if they don't have to pay ahead. But I mean, it's a definite talk and a consideration you have to make if you're willing to stay in that league.
Yeah. Again, tying it back to the time value discussion, it's like, do you move those picks at 50, 75 cents on the dollar because you know that end result in 2 years is actually going to be 0?
Yep.
You know, so I thought it was an interesting question because again, I never thought of it like that, and just an interesting talking point. Last thing here, you know, and we've done episodes about this, but discounting future draft capital, because again, we talked about it from the 101 perspective. You were kind of like that 27 101, maybe like if you can possibly get that guarantee pick for like back end of the second startup value,
Yeah.
like
Yep.
today, because again, you got to discount it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
In general, how do you look at it from a future draft capital perspective and then discounting that? Like, how much does the league dynamic shift the way you approach it now versus future? Some leagues don't care about draft capital. Some leagues only want draft capital. So that has to change the equation a little bit. But yeah, the last thing here before we wrap tonight's show up.
That one's tough. I think the majority of people who play in Dynasty want draft picks. They like draft picks. Draft picks are great. And so the discount is always the 27 draft is out because that's hyped up, right? But let's just act like that is not the case. The 27 draft is seen as the 26 draft. Then I would say if I see what I would consider a mid 27 first, I'm probably not even giving like the 110-ish in the 26 draft for it. I know you should because you could see that as a value gain, but we saw in this year's draft. Is there a lot of difference between the 105 and the 108? No. Is there in a lot of leagues? No. Can you even get that value out of trades? Sometimes, not always. And so it's one of those to where, yes, that future year should be discounted, but how much does it actually matter, when it all ends up?
Yeah, and ultimately we talk about draft picks, we talk about young prospects, we talk about youth, we talk about veterans. We're all subconsciously kind of applying this time value of assets discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you can look at KTC, Fantasy Calc, any trade calculator, whatever the case may be, and really that's what everybody's trying to do. How much should I discount this asset for one of two reasons? I got to sit on it. I can't do anything with it. And again, this is with the assumption that you're not moving these picks in between, moving these assets in between. Or I have a player that's giving me production now, but I have to discount it because you're not getting much dynasty life after this year or next year. Like I always just think of Mike Evans. Like that's kind of like how much more are we getting? So I would love, and again, I think it's impossible, but if you had a player and you were like, okay, I'm going to get 18 points per game in 2025, 16 points in 26, 15 in 27, 10 in 28, and then kind of the bottom drops out. What should that truly be worth?
Yes.
From a pick perspective, like should that be worth the 2026 110 or like, because again, you got to wait on it. Like, but you can't look at it that way because players get traded in the NFL.
Yeah.
Injuries happen, but I would love if somebody tried that. Like, what is the life of this asset? What is the use for that asset and the production? And we talk about it too. Like, would you rather get 2 15-point per game seasons from a running back or 5 10-point per game seasons?
Yeah. I mean, I always take the higher side, but no, I completely agree. And it's something that, and we could talk about, hey, said player, but the Dynasty community has to like that player in the first place as well. And so how we liked him as a prospect coming out matters because, like, talk about all the time, Amon-Ra St. Brown took 2 years for him to be valued anywhere close to where he should have been. And it's because he was a 4th round draft pick and people just didn't love him as a prospect. Now everyone does, but you had Jamar Chase come out and smash. Everyone loved him. And he was the wide receiver 1 pretty much from the get-go. And so it's that balancing act in Dynasty, man.
Yeah. So hopefully this was kind of an entertaining conversation, very theory based, trying to incorporate again the time value of assets and the different spin you could look at this, but really just to get people thinking, like, evaluate your roster, evaluate the balance between short and long-term assets. And if you have any thoughts on this, please share it in the comments and make sure you like the episode, subscribe to the channel. Use code theory over at ddfantasyfootball.com. The link is in the episode description below. You got the War Machine, the Trinity Tool, my cross-positional tiers, and most importantly and best of all, the DD Fantasy Football Discord community. It's absolutely fantastic. So again, hopefully you'll enjoy this week's episode. Let us know what you think in the comments. For Mitch Sorensen, I'm John Bauer. We'll catch everybody next week. Peace.